Okay, yeah, I kinda get it this time, because last year when I reviewed the Asus ZenFone 5, I didn't get the hype at all. It was an okay phone with a few flaws and a copycat UI, so I couldn't get really pumped about it. This year with the Asus ZenFone 6, I see a lot of improvement, and even though there are a few things that are maybe all that great, I definitely see the value now, and the only thing right now that needs a little bit fixing for sure is the camera software. Not talking about the actual camera quality though yet, but let me tell you in what almost is kind of a review why this phone has a lot of potential. And why not a review? Well, because I only have it for a day, but I can already tell you quite a lot because I've played it along with it the whole day yesterday. So design wise, well, it packs a 5000 mAh battery, so it's not the thinnest phone if we compare it, for example, with the 5D, which is a quite thin one, or for example with not its direct competitor, the OnePlus 7 Pro. That would be still the OnePlus 7, but as you can see, kind of similar thickness, but a huge battery. But it is after all noticeably less tall. In terms of width, it's also a little bit better. So even though it's almost as heavy with about almost 200 grams, this phone is actually quite manageable because, yes, that's a great thing, it's not as tall, and therefore the weight distribution just feels better. It fits good in the hand, and it has this kind of, I would say, almost premium heft, but not the premium quite so much feel, because I just have to point this out every time I get this. It feels a little bit hollow on the back, not a real issue, but it just takes a little bit away because of that. And the front, this also, and this is something that you will actually notice once you use it. It's sometimes when you just tap on it, it feels like there's nothing behind it. I know, not a thing for a lot of people, but I just wanted to point it out. I'm not gonna give this like a 5-star rating, more like maybe 4 stars, but this is still totally fine, especially considering what you get here, especially with the good design, with the curved back, which makes it feel thinner than it actually is, and it really sits well in the hand, and even one hand accessibility is actually quite good, just as well as the fingerprint reader, because yes, this is actually still in the phone. And for me, actually a little bit higher, and maybe not even that convenient, because what I usually do is I put it like here and then I have to swipe up. But it is a good one. The only thing that I don't like quite so much, but it's a general thing, is that there is a kind of fade-in animation, as you can see, which kind of makes it feel slower than it actually is, because it is really good and it's also super reliable. We have the camera, we're gonna talk about that definitely way more due to the whole rotation thing, microphone, then SIM card tray. I actually haven't put in my SIM just yet, but it will be my daily driver and also my main phone on Computex. Therefore, I have to get this video done today. This is the speaker that works also with the earpiece USB-C, and yes, we even have a headphone jack. So overall, I have to actually say that at first, my very first initial impressions about this phone weren't all that high, but I got actually quite fond of it after a while. Okay, side bezels are there, also a little bit of a bigger chin. Maybe you'll see this a little bit easier here. A little bit of a bigger chin, but therefore actually, even though we have maybe not the smallest top here, we have a notification LED. I can't tell you if it's multicolor yet because I actually didn't get a proper notification here just yet. But I would say that's that. At least we have a flat front. Even though I also have to mention that the oleophobic coating on the front does not seem to be that good because it smudges up quite a lot. And if you watch a video, it kind of makes the white feel beneath that then a little bit odd. But display wise, let's talk about that and let's actually see what we can change here. So we have the Splendid mode that still allows us for quite some customization because we have wide color gamut, we have standard, and then we have customize where we can change the hue and saturation. So you are flexible enough here. I would just leave it as it is because it actually does quite a good job. We can also then change the upscaling, font scale, and all those things. But about the actual quality, the one thing that I have to point out that's unfortunately not that good is the brightness. I mean, since this is an IPS display, the brightness isn't directly comparable with an AMOLED display because what I've measured here is 450, but that still is just about a mid-range average level. So this is definitely the weakest part in my opinion about the phone. If you want a solid display, a just normal good working display, it is this. But I think if this would have been an AMOLED display and just average AMOLED display, this phone might have maybe almost even ended up as my daily driver because it has a lot of other great things. But the thing is that I've already said in the past so many times, IPS displays, high-end ones especially, simply aren't a thing anymore. They just don't get developed any further. And therefore this one, which isn't one, because I think the last flagship IPS display that I've seen would have been the Sony Xperia XZ2, and this is a just good IPS display because there is after all quite some IPS glow. Actually not that bad, but it's just not super bright. But for most people, it should be fine indoors. Outside, it might become an issue, because yesterday when I made my shots, yeah. But like I said, that's the weakest thing. But well, that's, I guess, the sacrifice that you have to get into. Now let me get into the speaker test. This sound demo actually should have sounded really good, but I have to get into the sound here a little bit further, because what we have is actually, that's amazing. We have an audio wizard, and as you can see, we have normal, we have also custom. That's actually the interesting part. You can have an equalizer for the speaker, and that's something that I haven't seen in that way, especially since we can even adjust the bass and the treble. So you have to play a little bit around with that. I just left it at normal. There is also an outdoor mode which boosts the highs, but that sounds then way too thin, and here also this. But generally I have to say this: the speaker is loud and it sounds good, but it also sounds a little bit odd, because it sounds also a little bit like hollow. And let me actually show this once again for the demo. It's actually not that audible right now, but in videos more so. The earpiece speaker is noticeably thinner, and I think they kind of need to balance it out, because you definitely notice it that there are a lot more mids and basses coming from here, and this one is the way more dominant speaker, and it doesn't seem 100% in sync. So I definitely sometimes feel like the sound is still coming heavily from the right, but it doesn't feel like there is something additionally coming from the left, but it feels like it's a little bit out of place. Don't get me wrong, it's still a pretty good, especially since we're a loudspeaker and it's adjustable. So if you fine-tune that a little bit more, it could be there. But at the moment, it feels a little bit hollow, it feels a little bit off, but still, I'm talking about a stereo speaker set, so this means it's still better, like 80% what everything is out there. So don't get me wrong, it's maybe similar to the OnePlus 7, one of the weaker stereo speakers, but that still means quite a lot. The headphone jack, I didn't get time to check it yet, but we have the whole sound adjustment thing here as well, and I've heard from someone who used it already that it is supposed to be good. I'm gonna check that for the final review, but yeah, it should be actually pretty good, because I think it was on the Asus ZenFone. Now, performance-wise, I'm gonna say this. It is, well, after all, a Snapdragon 855, and it is actually pretty smooth, and as you can see, and it is, I would say, quite snappy, not quite as snappy as something like the OnePlus 7 Pro, but it definitely totally delivers, especially in games. It had the power. It did heat up though quite a lot, but I will get into that in the camera part, where it's a little bit more of an issue, I think. But the problem for me is where it just can't show off this whole performance is due to the display, because this 60 Hz display simply doesn't feel not even as smooth and like for example an AMOLED 1080p 60 display, because I said this in the past, IPS sometimes has quite some ghosting, and you see this on fast scrolling. It just can't quite keep up, and you see this kind of image retention since it's not the best display. So you will get a smooth experience, but it won't feel quite nearly as smooth as some AMOLED displays, and definitely not something like the OnePlus 7 Pro. But if you just wanna get things done really quickly, since it is responsive after all, it works out good. So this animation, for example, is not quite as reliable with this. As you can see, it doesn't quite get it so much, but there are different solutions when we are going to talk about the software. Now, battery life, I definitely could not check the battery charge just yet, because I fully charged it once, and since then I'm only down to 30%, because this battery holds up quite long. Even though not maybe as much as you might think, because so far it looks like 10 hours on Wi-Fi, which comparing or considering that it is a 5000 mAh battery isn't as amazing, because that's actually on par with the OnePlus 5T, so S70 7 Pro so far, but that one with Quad HD and 90 Hz. So I guess the main culprit here for the not that as amazing a battery life as it could be is the IPS display. But where it could shine actually way more, so where it could show off its potential, is like after a few cycles, and especially on the standby drain, it was absolutely fantastic overnight, 7 hours or so. I didn't even lose 1%, which is actually almost odd. And on mobile data, it could show its strength. So that's something that I can't fully say. It's obviously after a day, not possible. I know I'm gonna make the drain test for YouTube and so on. But what I wanna talk about is that something that I did not want to talk about last year was the software, because last year it was pretty much a pretty cheapo Samsung copycat UI. And now I'm hearing that this is like stock Android with a few enhancements. This is still Zen UI, don't get it wrong, still heavily Asus influenced. But underneath, it actually feels a lot like a normal Android phone, because I'm actually pretty stoked with this. I mean, some smaller things, but yeah, for example, here we have that we can also use it without the drawer. We have the Google Feed, so this actually still looks quite stockish also here. And what I'm using here is the night mode that unfortunately doesn't use complete black. I'm not quite sure if it's visible on the video, but it's like dark gray. But let's actually get into the options. For example, sound and vibration. We've talked about that. There is an outdoor mode. There is an audio wizard and all the other options that you usually expect. Display, let's quickly check that. Because since this is quite a new UI, I'm gonna spend a little bit more time on this. So night light, splendid mode, we talked about that. Sleep mode, auto rotation, that is still the same thing. Then light mode, let's just actually leave it on like this. You can change the display size, the font size, and the font style. You have 3 available, so that's already something that you usually don't get so often. You can change the app scaling due to the full screen. Status bar, icon manager, navigation bar. That's pretty interesting, because I said in my OnePlus 7 Pro FAQ that that's the only phone with 3 navigation options. Actually, it's not, because here we also have the navigation bar where we can switch out the buttons. Then we get, I would say this is pretty much the navigation that works out like a lot of people would expect it. So swiping up, and I'm not the biggest fan of that, how it works, so I didn't use it. But you can, because you can see swiping down. So yeah, it's pretty much just back and then this, so not all that flexible in terms of last app usage and so on, and it doesn't always trigger properly, so that needs some little bit of optimization. Swipe up home button is pretty much just the pill, but without the whole app drawer thing, because if you swipe up you see your last apps. You can adjust it a little bit, but for right now, I kind of tend to prefer the old solution. You can change, like I said, the button layout, but only for this mode, and you can then choose what the recent apps button does, so always show recent and so on. Now, the next thing would be lift to check phone is available, new notifications when one arrives, LED indicator. Then we have to get into advanced, because there is quite a lot of stuff going on here. We have a mobile manager, yeah. As you can see here, the typical stuff. This, by the way, is a 6GB RAM version that I have. Smart key. What it does by default is launch the Google Assistant. When you double press it, it shows you your agenda, and if you long press it, you can talk directly in it, but you can also customize that. Then we have a Game Genie. Don't think I have to talk about it. It's a pretty typical Game Genie. Twin apps is available, Safeguard, OptiFlex. Yeah. That's kind of optimization for battery. Gestures, we have off-screen gestures, which is pretty nice. For example, if I make a W, it's for the weather, which I haven't actually turned on. But for example, the camera, here as you can see, it launches the camera and it flips out just because I wanted it like that. So cool. Off-screen gestures are always nice. Then we have double tap to turn off, which actually even works in the status bar. So you double tap the status bar, it also turns off, but it also works on the screen, and it also works when the screen is off. But that's that. Next thing is, for example, double tap. We had that swipe to wake up, which is something that I don't want to use. Flip down to mute and hands on. Screen recorder is available, and actually quite powerful one, where we can change the resolution, the storage location, the orientation, the microphone, countdown. You can see the rest. Also nice to see. One-handed mode, for example, this would work like this. So it's smaller now, but what I've noticed, and the reason why I'm not gonna use it, I usually don't use it anyways, because it introduces a lag onto the home button, because it waits for the double tap. So I want it as fast as possible, so that's why I don't use it. Screenshot, obviously, with a scroll shot, flip camera features, for example, the toolbar and the display image right up. We are gonna get into that pocket mode and glove mode. Digital well-being is there. I think I've covered the most things. So I have to actually say, it doesn't quite look as stock Android, which is good, because stock Android doesn't look all that great in my opinion, but it has the functionality beneath there. They just slightly themed it, which is good, and they added quite a few features, as you have seen. So by now, I actually like it quite a lot. Besides the camera software, which has heavy issues so far. I mean, the quality is good, and we are going to get into that. But for example, let's actually see what we get here for all those people who haven't seen it, because I think it looks quite different compared to last time. So we have the options of time lapse, we have slow motion, we have motion tracking, we have video, photo, portrait. And the cool thing about portrait is if you actually make the portrait shot, you can later on go into the gallery and then afterwards change the focus and the amount of blur. That is actually pretty handy if you maybe didn't get that right. Then we have panorama, we have the night mode and the pro mode. And when you are in all of these, if you, for example, use photo, you can swipe from the sides to use the zoom. And for example, also swivel the camera like automatically, as you can see. Speed is fine, and someone actually asked me if you can do this manually, if maybe the motor gets broken. If it's broken, maybe yes, but so far if it's on, if you tried it, it always tries to kind of get back or in the mode that it was, so I wouldn't really recommend it, because this way you might actually break it even more so. About the one thing that I wanted to get into though, the issues, for example, where I started, when I yesterday made my photos, I've noticed that the software so far is very sluggish and slow, and the phone heats up crazy, because let's actually try this, and it actually should happen. So let me turn off HDR. And yesterday, I for 20 pictures needed like 7 resets of the app, so I kind of had to kill the app and start it again, because let's actually try this. And let's see how slow HDR actually is. So you can see, this is how long an HDR picture is, and this is the processing. And as you can actually see now, it already has this issue. Sometimes it simply can't process the picture. And I think I'm pretty much stuck now. It doesn't do anything. That happens so many times. I'm pretty sure they will fix this, because I know that because my brother uses the ZenFone 5 already for quite a while. And he got a lot of updates. But you have to actually kill it off twice to get it working again. So now it should actually come back after a few seconds. That's what's usually happened. Well, no, okay, now it got back. So, like I said, I'm not gonna show this once again because it took up already so much time. So keep that in mind. HDR, as long as you don't use HDR, it's fine. And you have seen how long HDR takes. The night mode, for example, let's try that one, how long that one usually takes. Let's make, for example, a picture here. So this is good. This needs to take a little bit more, so it actually does more. So that is fine. And for the modes, someone actually wanted to notice, we have 1:1, which is good for Instagram, for example. We have 4:3, and we also have 16:9 and even full screen. So you are pretty much fully covered, even though obviously full screen 16:9 crops in. So it's not like doing something really else. I don't think I have to cover more. Portrait mode, by default, just think about that it has a heavy in this mode, for example, and heavy beauty mode on with a lot of extreme optimizations. So let's actually get into the camera a little bit more here. You can, like I said, control it on your own, and you can use this, for example, for the panorama. You can also leave it like for example this. You don't have to get it all the way up. And you've definitely maybe noticed it. It works way faster if you just press the button. You can also hear the sound. But if you do it like this manually, it's slower. Okay, what I've noticed in normal use, you just have to be aware of it being there, because sometimes I usually hold my hand here and then it's kind of in the way when it wants to open. So think about it, be cautious. So I think I've covered it well enough. So let's actually see how the pictures turned on. And I have to say, I am impressed, especially since it is using the main camera for selfies. But I don't have the normal order that I have, but let's just see the pictures that they are and let's talk about them then. Because, for example, here, this is the night mode test, for example. This is the normal picture and this is the night mode, and at first glance it definitely looks a lot nicer, as we call, for example, checking closer, but we actually do get more details. We get a little bit of some oil painty effect, but generally contrast, so text is a little bit easier to read, for example, also here. And it's not that unrealistic as it is, for example, on the OnePlus. So I actually think that this is, in more situations, actually quite a legit solution. This looks a little bit more realistic, but it definitely has some benefits. For example, also here, let's check this with the night mode. It gets easier to read. So I think this is a pretty solid auto mode. Now here a few more pictures, for example, outside. This is without HDR, with HDR. HDR is always a little bit of a hit and miss, especially due to dynamic range. This, for example, once again shows a lot more details if we look closer. but it's personal preference. This looks a little bit more natural, this looks a little bit more pleasing. So I would generally say, if you want a nicer looking picture, go for HDR. It generally tends out to be like that, for example here. And I'm not gonna go fully through here for the review. I wanna let a few things just in the open. But as you can see, what HDR actually does is it looks more like what night mode does. So it brightens up the picture with more contrast and so on. Here, for example, as well, everything generally gets brighter. Not always though, but good quality, because as you can see, good sharpness, good amount of details. When you are not using HDR, it was quite fast. I would also say that the dynamic range in most situations feels good. For example, also different kind of lighting situations. The white balance got done really right. For example, here, like again, as you can see, what I've noticed is that sometimes the normal picture can look a little bit dull and flat, and it looks a little bit more, but kind of loses our dynamic range because we don't have that much darkness and that much highlights like we have without it. But for example, here, this is the thing. This is the normal mode, and there were no clouds, so you couldn't see them, they couldn't blow up, but you lose out pretty much on all the details here. But what you have is a lot more bright here and a lot more darkness. And if we now switch to HDR, you can see how much more you can see. Let's actually see this side by side. So this complete part here that you can still see gets completely lost in the picture, and everything looks noticeably brighter, but you, in my opinion, kind of lose dynamic range, because here everything dark is dark and the bright is bright. Here the bright is bright, but the darker parts are also bright. So keep just in mind what you want. Most people, I think, would definitely prefer this, because the color accuracy actually maintains to be quite there. And if I would think about what I've seen in reality, HDR is actually closer to that, because it wasn't that dark at this point. Then this, for example, is also once again like normal, and this with HDR, so generally gets heavily brightened up. This is the wide angle mode. I'm not gonna get into why I don't think it's a good wide angle camera. This is normal. So here's already a good example. Wide angle, and you can see the sides especially, yeah, don't maintain a lot of sharpness also here. So the center also not. So this is generally not, it looks good at first glance, and the colors are actually, especially if you zoom in now, pretty similar, especially here, very similar to the main cam, so they adjusted that quite well, but the quality is just not nearly the same, and especially visible on video, and especially for the selfie cam. But otherwise, I like the dynamic range, it's quite good. The autofocus was very reliable at all times, at all lighting situations, even in darker situations, and you generally get actually quite good pictures. I would say maybe with an update or two, it might even get on a flagship level, because it maintains so many details with a good sharpness, because I don't think the camera at all does try to over sharpen. It maintains a more realistic view, and with all those kind of aspects, I have to actually say that for a camera that isn't really reliable so much yet, the quality is pretty good. So this is a wide angle photo with, well, the main camera, but I mean, it looks a little bit stretched. I look a little bit thinner than I am, but it looks a little bit odd, so you don't get good quality. So I would say, if you want to make selfies, don't use the wide angle cam. I would generally say use the wide angle cam only if you just need the wider angle, because the quality compared to the really good main sensor just loses out so much. Because I mean, just compare this amount of detail of how much sharpness there is, and colors look way nicer than, for example, here. But talking about already that, so this and this now looks completely different. Like I said, the bokeh mode goes completely overboard by default, so I forgot to change that, but I have a few more pictures that show how good the bokeh mode is. Because as you can actually see, yes, it cuts off my hair, but that's something that every phone has trouble with. And like I said, I really like the fact that we can afterwards change the focus and change the amount of blur. So here, once again, not a good wide angle shot, a great selfie. So this is, I mean, how could it not be? This is easily 5 stars for the front camera. Let's quickly go through these. So inside, like I said, the same issue here with the bokeh. I have some other more pictures. But great, I mean, look at that sharpness, look at those colors, even in not that great lighting, natural skin tones. I guess I also have to say that they got the color science, especially for skin tones, really right. Now, once again, in low light, even the wide angle gets so worse, because, I mean, look at this bloody mess. And now, this is, wow. At this lighting, I don't think I've ever seen a picture that got even close to that. And I mean, there are some other cameras that use the main camera for their selfie, but this is by far the best one. This, for example, with flash shows that I am, after all, the Terminator, I guess. But now this is the odd thing. If you use the flash, you always get this. So I hope they could fix this with a red eye filter, because here, for example, wide angle, this, and this happens also in video. So I would like to get rid of that, because so far you can't use the flash for these, because this just looks odd. Okay, this now, normal picture, and this now is the night mode. So this is actually the first time, and pretty much the only time, where the picture got darker. In terms of sharpness, did we get something more? Not really, I would say. In terms of realistic, well, here it loses a little bit out on kind of dynamic. It looks a little bit more dull. So I would keep in this point this one, because it looks a little bit more pleasing, I would say. But usually, generally, what happens, like for example here, things get brighter. But in this case, I have to actually say maybe it got a little bit worse, because if we get closer, the text now here got some odd fuzziness around. Some artifacts going on due to the post-processing, which just isn't there. So here it looks a lot more pleasing. Colors look good. So this feels a little bit sharper if we go closer here to this point, for example. And even though it's a good night mode, in this situations I wouldn't maybe use it, because as you can see already out of the box, this looks pretty good. So already in lower light situations, the normal cam does pretty good. It looks mostly more realistic, like for example here also. But if you want a little bit more brightness, it is good. Wide angle, once again, super blurry to the sides. The normal one, absolutely fine. But I at least like that they seem very well balanced in terms of colors. Now this, like I said, freaking, and I almost wanted to say something else, amazing selfie quality. And now with the blur, you can see it cuts off a little bit of hair. But that's fine, especially since the quality is fine. For example, here also, sometimes it looks a little bit flat. But generally, whoa, I like. So, nope. Videos I'm gonna show off in afterwards, because I want to give you the raw footage unchanged so you can see it, but I can tell you already this much. 4K 60 has issues, just like, for example, the camera in HDR, because it seems like not being fully optimized, because it stutters a lot. You will definitely see that, and especially on the viewfinder it's almost unusable, because it has such a delay and such a low frame rate, and you barely can get a smooth fitness. It's not as bad as in video, you will see this on a sample, but otherwise the quality would have been fine. There is no stabilization, and it feels definitely way more nervous, like for example the OnePlus 7 Pro. I don't know why I want to say the 5 all the time, but that for right now is not usable. That should be able to be fixed though. What is absolutely usable though, and almost, I would actually almost say right now already on a flagship level kinda, which I didn't expect at all, is 4K 30, because the EIS seems very realistic. There is not even that much motion blur in it. It does smooth out really well. So a smaller minor movement actually did get a filter very well. The quality was really good. The autofocus was absolutely spot on. Even in not that great lighting conditions, it got it right. And the quality looks pretty good, with also good white balance, dynamic range and everything else. I am pretty impressed. And the microphone quality is also pretty good, but I noticed that you have to really check for yourself how you hold it, because sometimes I held it and it had a big impact. So maybe not because of blocking out, I'm not quite sure, but keep that in mind. But the quality itself is actually pretty good. And well, about the selfie videos, don't use the wide angle. Let's just forget that. But here also 4K 60 not really usable. I mean, there is no crop, which is good, but it's just too jittery. But if you use then the normal camera in 4K 30, nice and smooth, amazing quality, autofocus and everything else, you will see in the samples. So let me get to the conclusion for right now. My very first impressions were not that positive, because I had the OnePlus 7 Pro here, which this is solid. This feels a little bit hollow, but this is something that I can't show you that much on video, because it's the way you feel. This phone feels dense, and this, because you can actually even bend it a little bit, feels just like there is not that much inside. And that's why I didn't quite get the quality aspect. But once I got used to it, got past the point, it actually feels very nice, because all those curves, the design feels very nice, the weight distribution, good in-hand feel, no notch, no nothing. And the camera is an innovative thing and gives you the ability to have an amazing front camera. So after a while, I got really pleased by that. The display, like I said, it's not the most high quality display, and that's, I think, the weakest part. So Once again, if this would have been an AMOLED display, and what I would have really wished for, like last year where we had an Asus ZenFone 5 and the 5Z, which didn't change the display, but what I would have wished for, this is $500 at the moment, maybe even bump it up to $600, and maybe with the bigger storage capacity then, so make a little more of a premium version with, for example, let's say 8 gigabytes and 128 or 256. Bump up the price to 100 more or 150, where it's still then at 650, but give it a good solid AMOLED display, and you can get that for the price already with something like the Xiaomi Mi 9. So if you would have gotten that level of display, this would have been an amazing killer phone, because the speaker system, even though it sounds a little bit hollow, is a dual speaker system. It is a Snapdragon 855 that would, with the AMOLED display, even more so be able to show off that performance, because due to the ghosting, it never felt nearly as good as this one, even at 1080p 60. The battery life should be pretty impressive, even though it doesn't look that impressive just yet. The software, I have to actually say, no real complaints here yet. Besides, like I said, the camera that needs some fixing. But talking about the camera, already at this point in time, where it's super early out, and like I said, you obviously see that the software isn't there yet. With the lockup in the HDR mode and the jitteriness in the 4K 60 mode, you can see that the quality absolutely delivers. All was spot on. And this already now is a way better general camera than compared to the OnePlus 7 Pro. And for this price, it's definitely amongst the better ones. I'm not going to say it's yet completely a fully flagship camera yet. I need a few more days, especially on Computex, I will see that. But, oh boy, I just noticed this video is 30 minutes long. I'm getting way too overboard with my video length recently, so I'm just going to stop it here. I have to say, once again, similar to the Asus ZenFone 5, you actually get a lot of phone, but not everything on the highest level. This time the level got bumped up noticeably, and the only thing that didn't do that is the display. But if you are okay with just a good display, but want everything else on a pretty high level, this, for this price, actually, I have to say, yeah. So this time, I get it. Okay, kinda. Bye. Okay, so this is the Asus ZenFone 6 in 4K 30. And as you can see, there's a brutal crop to get the EIS working, and even fully stretched out, I barely get my head on it. In low light, it gets quite soft, not that grainy though. Quality in good lighting situation, since it is a main camera, actually though looks pretty nice, with some pretty nice working autofocus. Let's see the wobble. Sound quality we'll check later on. Colors look pretty good, so if you want to use this for vlogging, this might be a great solution. But definitely you need kind of like a selfie stick, because the crop is extreme. And this now would be the Asus ZenFone 6 in 4K 60. No heavy crop anymore, but therefore also no EIS. But if you have steady hands, that might work out actually quite good. But pretty much the same here. It gets a little bit soft. Autofocus had a little bit of a jump here, but it doesn't seem that grainy. But once again, main camera quality with autofocus. Pretty impressive so far, I have to say. Now the crop isn't that bad. I'm not quite so sure about the EIS not being there, of how much of an omission that is. But if you maybe use a gimbal, I mean, especially the colors look nice and the quality, this might be a real cool solution. But I guess for most people on the go, something with EIS might work out better. But